All right, welcome to the Great Trials Podcast. This is Steve Lowry with Yvonne Godfrey. Yvonne, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Steve. How are you?
You like how I drew that out, the suspense?
I know. I thought you were going to say something maybe different than the usual.
No, I mean, the only thing I'll mention is that I can see your little blue light, and I know that Raz is that's a big faux pas of his. I mean, come on, we've been doing this for how long now?
Thank you. Thank you for warning me. I know he hates that. Right. For our listeners, our mics have little blue lights on them.
And Raz has made it clear that if he sees that blue mic, he's not happy. So
and on his mics, he has like electrical tape over the light, so he's a little cuckoo.
Yeah.
Just try to make sure you look good.
That's
okay.
That's right.
Look good for the podcast, right?
That's right.
Got it.
Well, Yvonne, so we have a great show today. We have a fantastic guest, and I'll go ahead and introduce John Uustal. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Well, we are so glad to have you on. John is a fantastic trial lawyer from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He's a founding partner of Kelley Uustal, and you can look him up at kelleyyuustal.com. That's KELLEYUUSTAL.com. And we're looking forward to a really great show. But Yvonne, I was going to tell you first, just not that we try to get people to join different trial lawyer organizations, but I don't know if you knew, but we had our ABOTA Masters in Trial program last Friday here in Savannah, and it was really I just wanted to do a shout out for all of the lawyers who participated, the judges. It was really a fantastic program. And as you know, or maybe our listeners know, that ABOTA is American Board of Trial Advocates. It is an organization that stands up for the right to jury trial. That's we want to make sure that we don't lose that right. And it's both plaintiff and defense lawyers. And so we did what's called a Masters in Trial. And so we actually tried a medical malpractice case. And we had, there are two different Georgia ABOTA organizations. There's Georgia ABOTA, which was the first one. And then there was the spinoff, which is the Southeast Georgia ABOTA, which is Augusta, Savannah, Brunswick, those areas. And so we had a trial of a med mal case, and the Southeast Georgia ABOTA was representing the plaintiffs, and Georgia ABOTA was representing the defendant. And it was I was really impressed by how serious every lawyer took it, every witness took it, and our judges. And we had a jury in there, and it resulted in a plaintiff's verdict. Probably not as much as they wanted, but it was $2.26 million. And so, and I don't know if you knew this, Yvonne, but we had. It was a challenge between the two groups. So there's a massive trophy that was given away to the Southeast Georgia ABOTA afterwards. But
I did see a picture of the trophy.
Yeah.
I wondered if you had anything to do with that.
Oh yeah. No, I
told everybody. You like to win.
Well, not only that, but I told everybody, I said, I want this to be like the Stanley Cup, so that, whichever side wins, they get to keep the trophy for a while, take some pictures with it, pass it around, and then we'll bring it back next year. Hopefully we'll do this every year. And then we'll have the trophy there again, and whoever wins that one will take the trophy with them that year. So
it's very cool. Well, I'm glad you brought that up also, because, and this relates to our guest, John, as well. But, it's so hard to, especially when you're getting started, you want to know what happens at trial. And depending on what you did in law school, you didn't really see any. And, especially right now, it's really tough depending to see one. I guess maybe if you can find one on Zoom or that's being, broadcast somehow, or CVN or whatever, then you might be able to see something. But, it's funny because otherwise you want to know what happens. And the only real way that you get to see it sometimes is through transcripts, if there's a transcript of a trial. And, depending on the style of work that your firm does, you don't have that many of those a year. Right. I just remember really wanting to know what happened. And it's not until you really get to go and watch trials, you can learn. But the next best thing is being able to learn from others who are willing to teach you, who are willing to do these mock trials or mock openings, closings. And John, I know you do a lot of stuff with trial school, and I just think that's so huge because, that's how newer lawyers learn is really from other lawyers being willing to share their knowledge and resources. And it's just, so something like that, a mock trial, especially with jurors, is huge, because otherwise you're just talking about your case to other lawyers, and we all have lawyer brain.
Yeah, and you get to ask the jurors afterwards in ways that you don't always get to ask in a real trial.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Steve and I think are luckier than you in that that it was easier to get trials a while ago. And that's a shame, so we have to figure out a way to pass on the information. It's not like I invented it, it was passed on to me, but so I do feel an obligation to pass it on to younger lawyers who have more trouble getting it.
Yeah. Well, and it's like we always say, I mean, the best way to learn how to try a case is to just get in there and try a case. The second best way is to watch a case be tried. So, it's great to watch lawyers, from all over. This one was lawyers from all over Georgia, and just look at their different styles and look at, how each did things in their own way. I thought all very effective and did it very well, but they all had their own personal stamp that they put on it.
Yeah.
So, well, John, let's talk a little bit about your background so everybody can know everything that you've accomplished. You've John has tried a number of great cases, lots in the field of product liability, some against big tobacco, and just had some tremendous verdicts. Including, verdicts involving fuel tanks, seat belts, helmets. Like I said, some of the tobacco cases, and then the case we'll be talking about today is a pressure cooker case. So John is a graduate from Georgetown University, and then went to University of Miami. And I want to talk to him about his experience at University of Miami, because I had a similar experience at my law school in my first year. But as I said, John has tried just a ton of cases, all just gotten some really, really fantastic results. Has been named Best Lawyers in America from 2008 through the present, Super Lawyers from 2009 through the present. In 2016 was the Lawyer of the Year for Best Lawyers. We already mentioned that he's on the faculty of the Trial School, which is a great group that sort of brings trial lawyers from all over the country, and sort of is a mix and match of different styles and sort of melding them together. From jury selection through opening, closing, how you handle witnesses. But John was the Product Liability Lawyer of the Year, was named as the most effective lawyer for product liability by the Daily Business Review, and has written a book called Corporate Serial Killers, which I definitely want to go read. It sounds like it's just a fantastic book. And honestly, when you're taking on some of these cases, and you see the behind the scenes, and I always think about this, because even when we get great evidence, even when we get the emails or the memos, I still feel like we're only seeing sort of the tip of the iceberg of what's really being discussed in these corporations, where, and I'm not saying every corporation is bad, but there's a lot have definitely put money and greed over safety. And so John has been spending his whole career fighting corporations like that.
If I could just say a couple of things about that. First, the book's not available yet. It will be.
Sorry, I thought it was.
Yeah, no, it's not available yet. It will be soon. I'm glad you brought that up in relation to this case, because as we talk about it a little more, you'll see how the real evidence was hidden, and it was always hidden a little more. And you guys know from your cases, it happens a lot that the case is different if you put in the work than it seemed at the beginning because of the horrible stuff. Plaintiffs' lawyers are by nature, I think, generous in their willingness to share evidence. And so, and that's so helpful, because sometimes you have a case where you already know some of the bad evidence from inside the corporation before you start because of other lawyers. But the case doesn't show up with the internal evidence. You got to go get it. And
That's
this
right.
is a perfect example of a case where that the internal evidence changed it from an impossible case that no one would or could ever win, nor should they, into the most devious corporate crime you've ever seen. And, I'd love to talk about trials. I think I'm great in trial. I'm the most arrogant son of a bitch you ever met. So I want to talk about trial, but every time I talk about this case, people are like, holy shit, they want to hear more about it. So I'm actually glad we're talking about that.
No, I and I definitely want to get into that because I mean, just from investigating this case and just and we're going to talk a lot more about it and just deciding to take the case had to be a tremendously difficult decision for you and your firm, while you're looking into this, and so and so the work and just the perseverance and refusing to give up is just fantastic. But I did want to go back for 1 second and just mention that I read about you, John, that when you were at the University of Miami, it was Hurricane Andrew came through and basically knocked out your electricity and I'm sure destroyed a number of buildings and things like that during your first year. And so they had to compact your first year of law school into a much shorter session. And not always having electricity, and yet, despite that, I think I saw that you finished number one in your class in every single subject. So that's pretty tremendous. And I'll just mention the reason why I was I had a not like your experience, but a similar experience in my first year, my first semester of law school. About a week and a half before our final exams, we had just a terrible ice storm out in Portland, Oregon. And I remember I was printing off my criminal law outline, and like I got it printed out, and then all the power for our house, the law school, everything was just out, and it stayed out for about 8 days. And the law school had said, if we can get power up, we're not going to delay any of the exams or anything. And so we had to study by the fire or by lamplight. We went out and bought a bunch of camping lanterns, and we were studying our for our exams by camping lanterns. So a similar experience, not as bad as what you had to go through with Hurricane Andrew.
It was, it's funny how it relates to me being a trial lawyer, but at the time, obviously, I was just starting out. We had a couple of days of getting orientation and stuff, and that's when Andrew hit. And I'm from Fort Lauderdale, so we hadn't moved into our apartment yet. My cousin was an undergrad at the University of Miami, and we were going to move into the apartment a little late. But that's what the problem was. Everyone else had already had electricity and phone service, and then the hurricane hit. And so they spent about 2 months. People outside of South Florida don't realize what happened with Andrew, but I mean, it was devastating. People would have starved, but the army came in and trees were down. You could barely move. So when we called them, said, hey, we need new service. They're like, what? There's not, we don't do that anymore. So that we had to live without electricity because they weren't, they were trying to repair people who already had service. But, the idea of not having enough time to get something done and maybe having some type of something that makes it harder for you than the other side, that's kind of what plaintiff civil lawyers do. And you have to figure a way to, in a short amount of time, figure out what's important enough, get that done, and maybe not enough sleep. And I don't know, it turned out to be great training, I think, for being a trial lawyer, certainly a plaintiff's trial lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, working under tough conditions and through adversity but yeah, that's a crazy story. I mean, especially in your first year of law school, when at least speaking from my experience, I had no idea what I was walking into, except I knew it was going to be hard. So
I was scared. I remember,
Well, just so you guys know, I have my own extreme weather law school story, which was my third year. It actually snowed in Athens, which doesn't happen too often.
Right.
And the roads were really slippery. And I went out to get something from my car, and I was on my phone, and it was a flip phone because I was a poor law student. And I fell so hard that I cracked my flip phone open on my face, and completely broke it in half. That's
Wow.
it. That's as bad as it got. But it was pretty
I thought you were going to
embarrassing.
say like you had an indentation of the phone on your face.
I can't believe I didn't have like the
Right.
numbers on the side of my face, but
Yeah.
it was bad enough holding my phone that was in two pieces from smacking against my own face.
Yeah, exactly. Well, John, let's talk a little bit about the Gonzalez versus Lifetime Brands Incorporated and Vincent International Distributing and Yvette Buto Tamo. Am I saying that right? Tanis. But the main defendant, I think, was Lifetime Brands Incorporated, and this involved a pressure cooker. Lifetime Brands, if anybody's familiar with them, it's a very large corporation. They sell KitchenAid, or they make KitchenAid. They make Farberware and a bunch of other brands, including Vasconia, which is the one that we're talking about here. So on September 14, 2015, Samantha Gonzalez she was either 2 or 3 years old. I saw different references.
She was 2, yeah.
Okay, 2 years old. 2 years old. She was being bathed by her grandmother in the kitchen sink. And at the same time, her grandmother was making some soup in a Vasconia Aluminum 8-quart pressure cooker. And while the pressure cooker was going, it started to leak and then started to spew the scalding contents across the room and even onto Samantha. And so the grandmother at that point tried to, I think, either lift it up or to move it. And then while she was trying to move the pressure cooker, it exploded. And the contents went everywhere, all over Samantha, and she burned about 60% of her body, second and third degree burns. She ended up having to. She lost her leg, she lost a hand, lost some of her fingers on her other hand, and lost some of her toes on her other hand, and then just had some terrible burns and scarring and disfigurement. I mean, just a horrific injury to this 2-year-old, and just I can't even imagine, the grandmother having to go through that, where she's trying to basically just get this pressure cooker out of the way, and then ends up scalding her granddaughter. And so I'll cut to the end, which was that after a lot of very, very hard work, and we're going to talk to John about this. John and his team at Kelley Uustal were able to resolve this case for $27 million prior to going to trial. So it's just a tremendous result. But this is what I wanted to talk to you about, John. So my understanding is that when the grandmother first told her story, she kind of made it sound like she had just dropped the pressure cooker, or dropped the contents of the pressure cooker on Samantha. And so the police department, the fire department, and I think even the CPSC had done an investigation, and basically all concluded that this was the grandmother who had caused these burns by dropping the contents on the granddaughter. And then on top of that, the family had been to, I'm not sure how many lawyers before she found your law firm, but all of those lawyers had said no. And then even after you got involved, you had some of these pressure cookers tested by experts, and at least in the beginning, those experts were telling you that they didn't see any defect with this pressure cooker. And so I mean, I think I fast forwarded through maybe a lot of amount of time, but when I was reading this, I was just thinking, this is, just great work to stick with this case, despite, all of this, what we're seeing here. So talk us through a little bit about, what the police had found, what the firefighters had found, the CPSC, and even some of your own experts, and then how you kind of worked through that in order to figure out that there was a case here and there was a defect with this pressure cooker.
So I'm glad you're asking it like that. I think it's really important, you know, if we combine a lot of things, you said some of the things that came out later. And so the natural inclination is to say to yourself, well, I would have taken that case and I would have gotten 37 million. And listen, we're trial lawyers. That's what everyone thinks. God bless you. I'm if you didn't think like that, you probably couldn't do this job. But I have come to the conclusion inside my firm, and so I think other people outside my firm can benefit from this, but I'm not criticizing anyone else. I'm saying I came to the conclusion inside my firm that we were turning down cases of horribly injured people whose only shot for justice was with us, who had a righteous case, but we didn't know it.
Right.
And I listen, I'll be blunt. I think it's happening all over the country. I think the corporations are getting away literally with murder.
Yeah.
And, it is, if a corporation decides to break the law, and, you'll see why I mentioned that in this case in a little bit, but to take it out of this case, if the corporation decides to break the law and they know people will die, that's homicide. They don't have to want to kill someone, right? Corporations aren't psychopaths in that sense. They're psychopaths in the sense that greed is their only value. So, right. But that's still homicide. Okay. But what I tell people now is you need to spend a lot more time and money on cases that are unlikely to be cases. And at the end of that, 9 times out of 10, you'll have wasted a lot of time and money, and wasted in the sense that you weren't able to help the client financially, but you did help get them answers, right? You did help them say, okay, look, this is what happened. This is what, we don't have a defect here, whatever it is. So you're still helping the client in some sense. And because, you can't do this for everybody, but when you're talking about catastrophically injured people, they need you. They need us. We're the only one who can help them. The rest of society is practically given up. Samantha would have had a hellish life. So, so we have to come through from them. And because these cases are so valuable, if they do come through, that it's still, you're not going to go out of business. In fact, you're going to make your career off that. You're going to be taking these cases that no one else wants. And 9 times out of 10, they're not cases. But in my experience, more than 1 time out of 10, 1 time out of 4 or 5, they turn out to be at least some case. And sometimes like this, a really, really, really big case. But you just have to say to yourself, look, I've been doing this a long time. I can tell you right away, that's almost definitely not a case. But I'm still going to put time and money into making sure. So,
yeah, I just want to say, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm so glad you said that, because my reaction reading about this case was not, I would have taken that case and I would have gotten 37 million. My reaction was, especially with what you were dealing at with the beginning, was just a fear that I would have rejected that case, that I would have turned it down, or what other cases like that I rejected based on the police reports or whatever. That was my fear. That was my immediate thought.
When I told some other great trial lawyers, I was at a thing right after this settled about this, and all the guys from Florida, some of whom have been on your program, were like, was I one of the ones that turned it down?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But they weren't. But yeah, so it is important to look at what the case looked like when it came in. So let me start there. So when we looked at it, we had the grandmother it was a very modest home. The grandmother lived with her son and her granddaughter, and she was bathing Samantha in the sink, which, some jurors would be like, well, that's odd. And while she was cooking, and if I could show you a picture, it's like the sink is right next to the stove. It does seem a dangerous thing to do. She was interviewed by the police before we knew about the case many times on video, because they were and they read Miranda because they were investigating whether this was intentional child abuse. So she's on the record very clearly on video. They have her demonstrate what happened. And there was that they didn't conclude she hadn't committed child abuse. That was still open when the case came. She said in those videos that she got startled because the pressure cooker has a release valve, and when it started to release, it started shooting out steam, and she got scared. So she grabbed it and she dropped it she wanted to carry it over the baby to the second sink on the other side, and she dropped it on the baby. The pressure cooker looked intact. There were no obvious signs of damage or any sign of defect. And the CPSC had been called by the police and had told them there's no defect. And we shouldn't let this, but how many times do you say, oh, I know that guy that turned it down, he knows what he's doing. I'm not going to waste more time and money. So it had been turned down by really reputable lawyers. So that's what came to us. Luckily, someone in my office met with the family and was like, oh my God, we got to help this little girl, right? We have to help her. So that's how it started, with that mindset. Well, look, where did they buy it? Let's just at least see if we can help her. She spent a year in the hospital. She had parts of all 4 limbs amputated, including almost all, she's got disfiguring burns. This is why we became lawyers. Let's try to do something. So we had our own experts, and Steve mentioned this, but we asked them to look at it. And they said, look, this is a pressure cooker. It works like other pressure cookers. There's nothing defective about it. And, at that point, I don't remember when. I think that was before I had a epiphany that I want to tell you about the case. I think this was before. It was just that there had been a groundswell of pressure, especially from the younger lawyers in my firm, that we have to do everything we can. And so we said to those experts too, we went one, then got a second. We actually got 3 experts who said there was no defect, but 2 of them we said, we want you to test it, because they also couldn't tell us how it happened. They said, look, I don't know. I don't know exactly what happened. She probably just dropped it. There's nothing wrong with it. But we asked them to test some things about how the relief valve went off, and to see if they could find anything. And so we did spend some money, and they said, look, it works perfectly. The exemplars we tested, they work so that they can't open under pressure. They bleed off pressure in an appropriate way if it gets overfilled. And that's how this whole thing started. The reason the pressure relief valve started to activate was she overfilled it.
Okay.
So that's probably the most dangerous point when we, and then my partners, the younger lawyers, saying, hey, we got to keep going. But the partners are saying, hey, you're wasting money. There's nothing here. Right. Just write a check to the client instead of the experts. that might help.
Yeah.
But so I think, let me say one more thing. I know I'm talking, what do they call it? Calls for a narrative, your question, but
right.
That's my shifting the blame on you instead of me for being,
That's right.
But I had an epiphany around that point, which was, if you go into their kitchen, there was food all over the place. It was in the pictures, the police photos where I first saw that. But then we went there to kind of recreate where the pictures were. And how the hell did there was food on the ceiling, food debris on the ceiling, right? So in that moment, I said to myself, this did open under pressure, right? That's why there's food on the ceiling. It opened under pressure. And that kind of shifted in my head to like, if the experts can explain how it opened under pressure and not being defective, okay. But I at least need to get that answer. And they're not telling me that. They're just saying it's not defective. Mm-hmm. They don't know what happened, but it's not defective. So that's when we started to push harder. And I can, the next part's kind of interesting too. I could just roll into that.
Yeah,
if you
well,
want.
I mean, yeah. So my understanding, to talk a little bit about how you, because it seemed like maybe you were looking at one type of pressure cooker, and there had been maybe a change in the design or something.
Yeah, but Steve, it's way. If we start talking about that now, it's you don't understand the process that we went through to figure that out, right?
Yeah, tell us that then.
So yeah, give me a minute or maybe even
You're
two to
you're
get
the
there.
guest. You're the guest on the show, John. So you're allowed to talk
That's
as
right.
much as you want to.
Well, I don't want to be rude. So after I had that idea, I said, let's take a corporate rep depot. We found out a couple of things which ended up being important in that deposition, which was we had to file suit, remember, and I didn't know that we had a case. I've done that on multiple occasions, and if it turns out there's no case, I've always called the defense attorney, and they've been very good about that. Okay, we'll let it go. But they're not going to give us answers if we don't file suit.
Right.
So I felt it was legitimate. We filed suit. We found out that Vasconia is a very reputable pressure cooker with a long history of building pressure cookers in Mexico. And Lifetime Brands wanted to appeal to the Hispanic market in the US, so they licensed the Vasconia name, but they didn't import Vasconia pressure cookers. They got a cheap pressure cooker from a factory in China and called it Vasconia. That also made me feel like, that's a good jury appeal. That's kind of like fraudulent almost.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened at that deposition was the corporate rep referred to the thing that I wish I could show you, but to try to explain with words, on the side of the pressure cooker, there's a little gasket. And if the pressure gets too high, theoretically, the pressure could get so high that the metal rips apart and it explodes with the metal ripping into people like a bomb. So you can't allow that. They have to have a pressure relief valve. And so if the pressure gets too high, this gasket blows out, it gets pushed out of a hole, and steam comes off to bleed out pressure. And he called that a fail safe. So right then I said, okay, got to catch a flight. Depot's not over, but I'm stopping right now, because I was like, okay, I'll go to trial with this case now, because that did not fail safe. Whatever, it startled her, it scared her. He said it's a fail safe. It didn't fail safe. It's not a great case, but they have a case. I'm going to spend more on this. So yeah, not everyone agreed, but at that point I was like, I'm in on this. We're going to find out what happened. And so we did testing to force that gasket to blow to see if enough steam could come out to cause damage to the baby. I don't know why the grandmother said she dropped it, but at that point I figured that's what happened. The steam blew out the side and burnt the baby. You're allowed to stand in front of a pressure cooker and cook. So it's not, yeah, she was in the sink, but you're allowed to be close to a pressure cooker. And it had no fill line. So they say she overfilled it. Well, almost the real Vasconia pressure cookers have a fill line, so you know how high you can go. So I was feeling decent about the case. We tested it, and it was scary as F. I mean,
let me ask you a question. When you say you tested it, was it your experts testing, or were you doing some of your own testing just to kind of see how can we make this thing fail?
Yeah, so we did end up doing our own testing. This was, I think, the last one we did with an expert. And to be honest with you, the reason we switched was cost. By this point, we had spent a fortune now on a case that was probably not a case. And the experts were saying, we don't want to take your money. There's no case here. So I kind of lost faith, and it wasn't a team. They didn't believe in it. Mm-hmm. And in a way, as scary as that test was, we rigged it up to blow. So it didn't show a defect in blowing, but there was not enough steam to come out to burn her. So we basically proved that she didn't get burned by the steam coming out. But it was so startling. I thought, that's going to scare the hell out of the grandmother. It's certainly not a fail safe if it's that scary when it blows. but we couldn't keep spending that much money. The experts weren't really in agreement. So they thought we were ludicrous. They thought it was ridiculous. So we started doing testing in-house. We have a guy, I actually went to high school with him who works with me. He does everything. He's like a genius, but he used to build sets for plays. He builds us exhibits, and he's like, I can do the testing. So we started doing testing. He would do it at night, practically 3 or 4 nights a week. This went on for months. Basically, what I tasked him with was, tell me how this opened under pressure, or prove to me it didn't, because I believe it did. And I should say this, pressure cookers are not allowed to open under pressure. That's very dangerous. They have to have a lock. When they heat up and there's all this pressurized heat, it's super dangerous. So they're not allowed to open under pressure. So during that testing, oh my God, in hindsight, it was so stupid. I should be sued, because we already knew this testing was dangerous with experts. That time I told you when it was scary, that thing flew around the room, right? It launched and started flying around, and it flew past people's heads.
Oh my God.
Well, that happened again in our own internal testing, and it passed between 2 lawyers' heads who were standing next to each other. And I said, oh my God, we're so lucky. I can't believe I put them in that position. And that was the key to the case. Okay, so that's going to now it's going to roll. It's solved. That's what ended up solving the mystery, when we said to ourselves, we have to find a safe way to do this testing. And so at some point we figured out, hey, we don't need pressure and heat to activate the lock, because it's like a plunger. Let's just use a mechanical device inside the pressure cooker that we can communicate with by Bluetooth. It's a little bit complicated, but once you get it built, activate the lock from inside. Like pressure would activate it by pushing the detente up. We'll just push it up mechanically. And we did that, and all the exemplars worked perfectly and were not defective. But then I thought, well, hold on, we could do it to the real one, right? That we can't pressurize the real one, we can't put it under heat, but this little thing, and we did it and it opened. And suddenly it became clear they had fucking fixed the problem. Am I allowed to curse? I'm sorry, I'll say it again. I mean, think about the evilness behind that. And by the way, it wasn't Lifetime Brands. I just want to say that. You'll see, it was the factory in China that did this. Lifetime Brands didn't know about it. They figured out what they had done was they were putting the wrong size part inside the handle. So when it locked, it didn't actually lock. The lock was not a lock. It was just a mechanical thing that didn't lock. So at some point they realized that they fixed it, and the exemplars the factory gave to Lifetime Brands to give to us, guess what? They made sure they were not defective. So our experts found no defect. We found no defect. And it was only because in this unique circumstance, we were able to test the actual in a way that wasn't destructive. Otherwise, they would have gotten away with it. And that makes me think, how many times have other companies gotten away with it? I bet you it's legion.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Yvonne.
Well, it was a little bit off topic, but it's related to the whole manufacturer issue. And as you were describing the setup, I'm just wondering if you had to deal with any jurisdictional issues with this being made somewhere else, or if either Florida had laws or you had enough done by the by Lifetime Brands or the importer that you didn't have to mess with jurisdictional stuff.
Well, we couldn't, or we didn't, but I would think it's safe to say we couldn't sue the factory.
Right.
Realistically or practically. But Lifetime Brands in Florida, we had good enough law that, I mean, were they the manufacturer? Maybe. They hired the company. But they argued they weren't the manufacturer, but still as the distributor in Florida, we had good law on that. But, it did prevent us from getting documents from China that I would like to have gotten. We only had the documents that Lifetime had. I will tell you that the Lifetime's attorney, I mean, you should have seen him when I told him what happened. He was so furious, right? I mean, he was not in on this, he's a lawyer but still it was happening, Right. So
Yeah, well, and that's, I mean, there's just so many products like that that people don't know, that I think non-lawyers are frequently completely unaware that you can see this brand name recognition that you have, that you think is all made in one place. And you could really be looking at something that was made in a basically by a judgment proof
Yeah.
manufacturer somewhere else with just this name slapped on it. And depending on your state, Georgia's law is pretty bad on it, depending
Yeah.
on what the domestic sort of importer does. You can be screwed, and it's just so scary, especially when you hear stories like this, where it is something down the line where they're just using the wrong size part.
You guys talk
Anyway.
about Ford cases a lot, so I know you're up on what's happening, and Steve, I know you obviously would know this, but if we get a car that's sold in Georgia and they then initially sold new in Georgia and then it's sold used in Florida, we might not be able to get Ford, and that can be a problem. And the foreign manufacturers are taking advantage of that
Right.
new Supreme Court decision, and so you're going to go to trial against Toyota USA without any documents
Right.
about the
Right.
build of the car. It's a wall that has been built to. I don't want to say the Supreme Court built it for this reason, so I'm going to say, but I do believe they knew the effect. Okay. And the effect is that it will protect corporations who are committing crimes, and it will allow them to get away with it.
Yeah.
We came up in a certain way. I don't know where you guys went to undergrad or law school, but if you go to Harvard Law School, and I'm talking about the people on the Supreme Court, that most of them went to Harvard or Yale, they met other good people at Harvard and Yale, and they were good people. And those people that they're good friends with went off to represent big companies,
Right.
and work at big law firms, and they're still in their mind good people, and they wouldn't do anything horrible. And it's just, it doesn't matter if they say, oh, we've got liberals and conservatives. Bullshit. We've got a corporate court. Show me one person on the Supreme Court who didn't go through Harvard and Yale and have friends with all these corporate lawyers and trust them. So they come out with these decisions on arbitration or on jurisdiction with the car companies that just, I guess they assume corporations don't ever do anything wrong. I mean, it's
Right.
so
Mhm.
insane from our perspective,
Mhm.
but that's
Yeah.
what they think. And so when we have diversity on the Supreme Court, I wish we had union people who
Right.
lawyers and people, people who see whistleblower lawyers, people who know the truth about big companies today.
Yeah, it's one of the things that there's times when the law doesn't keep up with how industry's changing or technology's changing, and this is one of those instances where, at least in Georgia, the law has not kept up with how products come into Georgia and how they can come in under a Chinese manufacturer. Somebody else can put their name on it and sell it as theirs when it's not. And the law in Georgia is not good on that, and it's definitely something that needs to change. And I'm glad that Florida seems to be better than Georgia, at least in that regard, or else you would have had a difficult time, holding Lifetime Brands accountable for this product.
Yeah, that's true.
One thing I wanted to ask you, from one of the things I read, it sounded like you were able to find some other pressure cookers that were older that had the same problem as yours. Is that right?
Yeah. So once we realized that the subject pressure cooker operated differently than the exemplars, it was very difficult to find older ones, but we ended up doing a worldwide eBay search, and we found some in South America, I think 3, maybe 2. And when we got those, we took those apart, and then we saw that they had the wrong size part in the lock. So that's how we figured out, because once we saw that the subject opened while the exemplars didn't, it was still possible that there was a manufacturing defect that wasn't intentional, or there was some abuse of the pressure cooker in some way that had caused the problem later on. So, but once we got those, we knew what the story was. And so then we demanded that the subject pressure cooker be disassembled with the defense, but we already knew what it was going to show.
Right.
One other thing, which I think is interesting, because we didn't know when we got the case, the secrets that the corporation was hiding. That's pretty much always the case, unless our fellow lawyers have kind of gotten some of it already. But in this case, we also had a situation where our client was saying something devastating to the case, but also was contradicted by the physical evidence. So the way that ended up playing out was there were two things about that. One was the son said when he ran in, his mother was screaming, he ran around the corner, he slipped on water. So, well, how did water get on the floor? Again, she didn't drop it because it's locked, nothing comes out. Somehow it opened. And her neighbor heard her screaming and ran over. And she told us she was yelling, it exploded, it exploded. So at first, in focus groups, I was saying, look, she thought it, she dropped it. What can I tell you? It's a quick event and she got it wrong, but we know at the time she was yelling, it exploded. Well, the focus group jurors did not like that. And finally, one focus group person said, but she did drop it. It exploded open and she dropped it.
Yeah.
And oh my God, of course. Why didn't I think of that? Right. And once we did that, it was a strong case. So I just told them, the one thing I was worried about recommending settlement was it's hard to get a recall without the publicity of a big verdict.
Right.
But Samantha was too vulnerable to do anything except, the grandmother was very bad in her video depositions. It wasn't just that she said things that hurt us to the police. She was very aggressive. She felt responsible, but she took that out in ways which we all would, but in some of my partners said, you cannot win the case just from watching clips that I cut out of the worst parts of her deposition. So, I'm sure I would have won. I have no doubt, but like I told you guys, I'm an arrogant son of a bitch. So, I ended up deciding we can't take that risk with her. And so we just did the math, added in our fee. I told them the number, gave them a deadline, and they paid.
That's great. The thing about the grandmother, I mean, that's I'm wondering, a lot of times you'll see that when somebody has something terrible happen to a family member or something terrible happens, they just sort of take all the blame themselves, even though, because it's almost like their way of, atoning for what's happened. And it almost sounds like that's what happened with the grandmothers, that she was, just wanted to take this on herself and take responsibility for it, because she felt she owed that to her granddaughter. Was there some of that going on, you think, as far as why she was testifying the way she was?
Yeah, definitely. She was also scared. The police were looking at taking the baby away.
Right.
She was ashamed on some level, I think. And she certainly dedicated every waking moment of the rest of her life to caring for Samantha and making her life as good and decent as possible.
Yeah.
So, like you said, it's just a lot going on in your head in that situation.
Well, and depositions are so weird. I mean, I feel like there are these clients that I know really well that I've spent all this time with, not just preparing them for their depositions, but just in general, talking to them about what happened, being at their house, going out to the scene, whatever it is. And then sometimes in their deposition with a defense lawyer there, they will be like this person I've never met. You know,
Right. Yeah.
their attitude will change. There's some of their answers will change, not necessarily in a good way or a bad way, but it's just, you're just sitting there like, what is happening?
Right.
Who is
Right.
this person? Where is the person that I know?
Well, and there is this sort of human nature when something goes wrong is to just make assumptions or take responsibility for, you know, what's happened. And I've told this story before about the case that my law partner Jeff Harris and I tried, involving a park to reverse of or a false park with a Ford Explorer. And one of the things that we had when we were going to trial was that when our client was sitting there with this Ford Explorer sitting on top of her with her legs sort of pushed over her head, she told the police officer, I thought I put the vehicle in park, but I must have left it in reverse. And at first we thought that was going to be a really tough statement to overcome because, basically she was saying she had left the vehicle in reverse, and Ford, of course, was all over that. And then, we kind of thought about it, and we had done some focus groups, and we just sort of decided, well, when something like this happens, when a vehicle moves in reverse and you don't know that it will do that from time to time, what else is she going to say? She's going to say, I thought I put it in park, but I must have left it in reverse, because how else is it going to go backwards?
Yeah.
And so I think it's very similar to your case with the grandmother.
Right. That's a great point. Yep.
So John, how far out were you from trial when you got this, settlement offer that you felt like you really could and should recommend?
Well, I was about 2 weeks from trial, but I had I gave them 8 days or whatever it was, but the deadline was the hour before we started the hearing on the motion to amend for punitives, which would have delayed the trial if we won. And then, I haven't told anyone this before, but I was going to change my expert. So this was our fourth now, right? We had gotten a new guy and we had told, look, here's the case. It's already there, right? Yeah. It's already proven. In fact, their expert, I got him to admit everything that about defect, everything and he didn't know as much. I told them some of it before that deposition, but not all of it. So that was a good deposition. But our guy then went, or he might've gone before, I don't remember, but it just didn't work. It just wasn't going to work. I needed a new expert. So we had gone and figured out and I was going to, even if it meant a new trial date. So it wasn't going to go that either one or both reasons.
Yeah, because in Florida, you have to, in order to put punitive damages in, you have to make an evidentiary showing to essentially show that it can get punitives to the jury. It's not so you're not allowed to just plead it and have it as part of the case, right?
Right. And once you get permission, you have to plead and they have to answer, and you can't go to trial until that process is done.
Gotcha. I was just curious because I was just thinking about that time, that month-ish before trial where you're really starting to get in trial mode, and, you've got your motions in limine and stuff that are starting to be due, or you've done your pretrial order or whatever. And you're so, depending on the case, you're so conflicted because you're really starting to put the work in and envision what the trial is going to be like. But there's also maybe these settlement talks happening on the side.
I was disappointed for that reason. Of that in the settlement. And also, like I said, the publicity would have helped get a recall, and there was no recall. And I've tried to pressure the CPSC since. I mean, I have proof.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't regret the decision at all. It was the right decision for her. But I can think that, and also think, man, I would have gotten a verdict so big that it wouldn't have been paid. The court would have sent it back down, and I tried it again, and it would have been even bigger. And this would have gone on for 15 years in my mind.
That's right. That's right.
Well, and this is also one of those things, like sometimes you're in the case and you're ready to try it, but it's like medical negligence case or something like that, where it's like, you don't have necessarily sort of something that's as infuriating as this, or the implications, the scale is not as potentially as big as this. So when you're weighing those things, it's maybe an easier decision than it would be here for you. But obviously it was still a terrific result and a massive settlement that they had to.
I have to ask, because anybody who's been in a partnership, especially law partners, we've all been through this where, my law partners have always been very supportive of my cases and I'm supportive of theirs, but it doesn't mean that there aren't times when we don't question their cases, be like, are you sure this is the one we want to take to trial? And I'm just wondering, how were your, how relieved were your law partners when you got that case resolved, for the, amount that you did?
They were relieved. I agree that I think like you, my partners are very, we're very, I'm sure everyone would say this, but it's true. Like, we're very trusting of each other on their cases and what they're doing. I also think I think we've got 6 lawyers, and I'm proudest of the lawyers that I trained that have 8-figure verdicts,
Right.
So I don't think it's that common to have a firm with so many lawyers that get 8-figure verdicts. But from a certain perspective, this was insanity. There were I was told, you cannot win this case.
Right.
And at the time, I wasn't like, I was like, yes, I can. I was like, well, you might be right, but I gotta put this to bed.
Yeah.
And since then, I think all of us have adopted this attitude more. It's okay to spend a lot of time and money on something that doesn't turn into a case.
Yeah.
We have 4 cases now, which I'm tracking because I'm trying to convince people that there's this vast criminal scheme in all these companies and they're getting away with it. And people who are devastatingly injured are not getting compensation, and it's not right. So I'm trying to convince every lawyer to look at these cases more. We now have 4 cases that one was a verdict and 3 settlements over $20 million on cases that at least 7, the 3 of them had more than 10 firms turn them down. One of them only had 7 firms turn them down. But just think about it. That's it's over $100 million. One of them's almost 30. That is a lot of money. So you can't be penny wise and pound foolish from a business perspective. I'm not telling you to go bankrupt when I'm telling you to take a lot of time and money on cases that you're probably going to, they're not cases. But
no, it's a great point. And I'll be honest. I mean, there's been cases where that have come into our office, and I'll look and see the lawyers who've looked at it and have turned it down. And if it's somebody that I know and have respect for, usually I'll pick up the phone and call them and say, what was wrong with this case? Why didn't you take it? And that doesn't always mean that we'll reject it. But if they've rejected it, it is something you got to consider. I'm sure we've all been through that. Where you have cases that come in that some other lawyer who and respect has looked at and decided, to take a pass on.
Yeah,
because we're so busy, and also our experience means something. Like, we're not wrong.
Right.
We can quickly size it up. That's probably not a case. That probably is. And in the courtroom, you have to make decisions with limited information and quickly. And that's why we're good. We make the decision more right than wrong. More likely we're right than wrong in the courtroom. But you don't have to make it quickly in this situation. And so maybe we can, almost every other lawyer, no matter how good they are, they're making that initial determination on likelihood. But like, if I said to you, look, you can borrow my car, there's only a 1 in 100 chance that it's going to blow up today. You're not going to take my car. Right. So I'm trying to get you to look at it more like that than like, yeah, you're probably right. It's not a case, but let's make sure.
Yeah. I think that's good advice. And I think that's really good advice for newer lawyers. I mean, number one, because a lot of times depending on the case, if they're getting a call they're maybe not the first person getting the call, right? If it's, especially
Right.
if it's coming straight in from the client. So it's a client who's had to go down the list, but also, that is something that, at least for me, you are not taught how to do in law school at all. I mean,
At all.
you're taught what to do with existing cases. You're not
Right.
taught, how to decide how to pick a case. That's something you have to learn from the people you work with, or if you work on your own, I guess, learn it on your own. But I do really like that, because because the advice that you have, John, is I don't think people get a lot of advice on that. They're left to just sort of figure it out case by case. And it's a really hard part of the job when you start having those calls with people that have been through a lot. And they're not lawyers, right? So they're telling you a lot of stuff you want to know, and a lot of stuff that you don't want to know, but you're kind of their therapist in that moment, in addition to other things. It's a lot. Like it's, but again, I think that giving, the advice that you have is useful for new lawyers who may have that time, right? Depending on if they've gone out on their own and they need the cases and they need the business, they may have that sort of those man hours to put into it and find those cases, and just spend more time on them. Just because somebody else turned them down doesn't mean they're not going to be a good case for you.
Right.
That's right. Oh, and and I've said this, in our practice, this is the, when you do, especially product liability cases, I would say, when you do products cases, it's the decision you've made, and we're all passionate about it, but those cases, just to figure out if you have a case, are, it's an undertaking. It's an investment.
Even with just the one expert.
That's right. Exactly. I mean, but you're going to have to spend money in order to figure out if you have a case. It's just the way that is the nature of the business.
It's getting trained in products cases, learning from someone who knows how to work up a products case, being mentored by someone like that, working there for, years. It's incredibly valuable to a trial lawyer, even if they end up not doing products cases.
Right.
I've never lost a commercial case. And one of the judges who that I'm in front of a lot down here said, it's pretty amazing to see it tried like a products case, a commercial case like a products case. It's much shorter. And I think that's why I win commercial cases, right? That training.
Yeah.
So.
No, we've actually said that, if you take the product liability model, as far as how you work up the case, how you develop it, and then how you put it on trial, and you put that on a lot of other cases, you'll have, in my opinion, a very successful practice. So John,
are you guys taking applications for young lawyers?
Oh yeah, we absolutely. We want go-getters. So I wanted to ask you about your is there anything else from the focus group that you thought was helpful in either developing this case or deciding how you should present the case?
Yeah, there were two other things that I didn't put. Well, actually, I was going to say that I didn't realize they were so important, but that's not actually what happened. The first few focus groups that happened, I was in another trial. And when I came back, I was told we lost 3 focus groups, right? And I said, well, that's not why we do focus groups. I didn't say to go do focus groups so you could tell me if we should take this case or not. That is not why we do focus groups. I don't know about you guys.
Oh yeah.
So I said, show me what did we learn? What did we do wrong? That we're trying to figure out what plays and how people think of it. So when I reviewed the data from them, one thing that stood out to me that we hadn't done in those focus groups was and we didn't have the other thing that I told you where the focus group juror had given us that great insight that she did drop it. So, but the other 2 things at that point that we were doing wrong, or that I guess you would say we learned from the focus group, but we had to put in the time and effort to figure it out in response to the focus group was, number 1, it was very important to the jurors. In fact, I don't think we ever lost a focus group once we added this fact right at the beginning, that they wanted to penetrate the Hispanic market. So they licensed the Vasconia name, but they didn't import real, true Vasconia pressure cookers. They went and got fake, cheap pressure cookers from China. The whole case starts with a fraud, right? It just changes everything. That was very important. So one of the things I said we want to change in our next presentation. The other thing was, it is very difficult to explain this part of the case. And I insist with our lawyers on simplicity. If you can't tell it simply, you're going to go into a killing field and you're going to lose credibility. If you can't tell it simply, then you have to eliminate it from your presentation. And so they had eliminated this part of the case, which was, so when they asked for this pressure cooker from China, the company was building metric pressure cookers in liters, but for the market they wanted to appeal to, they wanted them in gallons, in imperial. And so it was a slight change, and not much, but it was a change in the size, and they had to pick which handle to use. Okay, that's where the problems really happened, because they used a handle from a smaller pressure cooker and the part was too small internal. And so that's where it started. But since they changed the size of the volume of the pressure cooker, in their mind, all we did was change the size a little bit, so we don't have to do UL testing again. The law doesn't require UL testing, but they put UL approved on their sales material, right? And that's not true. That was a lie. They didn't retest. And if they had, they would have found out. So, you know, that we had to find a way to tell it simply, but we had to explain. It was very complicated when UL requires testing it, but that was an important point, that they lied that this was a UL, a pressure cooker that met UL standards. It did not.
Yeah.
So those were 2 points from the from the focus groups, at least indirectly.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'll never forget when I was a brand new lawyer and I worked for a lawyer named Joe Freeman, who was sort of this old school flamboyant trial lawyer, and he defended JCPenney, defended Chrysler, GM, and had done a lot of this big defense work. And he would get brought in a lot of times to do focus groups or mock trials for the corporation. And he always told me at the beginning, he always told me that if he had won all of his focus groups or won all of his mock trials, he knew he had done something wrong in the focus group, because he wanted to see, you know, he knew he had either weighted the facts wrong or not told the story right on behalf of the plaintiffs. And so I've always taken that to heart whenever you do focus groups or mock trials, is you always want to see, you know, what your weaknesses are, see what, you know, how you can lose the case before you decide, you know, what's the best way to win it. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I tell people here, your goal is to find out, if we lose, why it would have happened.
That's
right. So if you win the focus group, what did you learn? I want to know, if we lose, how we would lose if we're going to lose. Let me tell you one other quick story, though, because I love trial stories. It's focus group related, but it's a trial story. I have one case. I think it was my first commercial case, and it was my father-in-law. That's the only reason I took it. And so I'm like, dude, we're settling. Like, I'm not going to take the risk of losing this case. I got to see you
right.
for the rest of my life. They would not pay a dime. So I focus group that more than I've ever focus group a case in my life, and we couldn't lose. Right. It was, in a way, it was a simple case. It was complicated legally, but not emotionally. And the defense attorneys were commercial lawyers, and they would kept telling me, don't you know, you can't pierce the corporate veil. And I was like, I don't think the jurors know that.
Right.
You know,
Right.
So, but I tried it. We couldn't lose. We even got into demographics and how much money, and because it was a lot of money at stake, and it was a big company, and maybe they don't like executives at companies. I couldn't find a bad juror. So this was another judge that I was in front of a lot, and I was known for these really long voir dires. I had done tobacco cases with him, I think, already at the time, and we would fight in front of the veneer. how much he would try to make me say in front of them, I only have 50 minutes left, or I only have 2 hours. And I wouldn't. I would say, I don't know, Judge, could go into tomorrow. And so that's the only reason I did this in front of this judge. It was risky, but I knew he was going to be so pleased about a short voir dire. So I got up. The case was against AutoNation, who's owned by Wayne Huizinga, who I think it's certainly in Florida. He's,
right. Yeah.
But I think around the country, he's well known as a billionaire. So I said, does anyone know Wayne Huizinga personally? First question of voir dire. No. Can everyone use their common sense? Yes. Judge, we'll take any of them. And I sat down. And the focus group gave me the confidence to do that. And the defense lawyer wasn't ready to stand up and say anything. And he made some serious mistakes in his voir dire. And we won. The jury was out for like 6 minutes.
That's awesome.
awesome.
That's great. I love that.
That is so cool.
Well, John, this has been just a fantastic discussion. I want to make sure about the Gonzalez versus Lifetime Brands Incorporated case. Is there anything else you want to make sure that our listeners know that you haven't had a chance to tell them?
I really don't think so. I mean, look, I have a couple of things over here, a couple of notes I took. Well, this will only take a couple, very short to tell you, but once we figured out that it could open, I hope I've given you a sense of how hard it was to develop this, but I really have excluded some really difficult parts. So just to give you a taste of one of those, just because it could open under pressure, we still had to prove that it did.
Right.
And how did it open under pressure? Did she open it? It could open under pressure, but why would she open it? She didn't have time. So that was a very difficult thing to prove. But one day on the internet, we were looking at pressure cooker situations, and I saw a video of a pressure cooker with a side valve like this releasing. It was in a restaurant where they had a camera always on, and someone had clipped it and put it on YouTube. But it's blue and it started rotating. And then I remembered that happened in our test too. Remember when it flew through the room, it was rotating. And so the way the handle was on the top of the pressure cooker, not the bottom. So when she grabbed that, if there was this rotational force, then that would have rotated the pressure cooker open. That was extremely difficult to prove. None of the experts wanted to believe that it was possible. We had to do our own testing on that too, to prove that it was indeed possible, that the rotational force created by the thing blowing, if she was holding the handle, would open it on its own.
Wow. So, I mean, so the rotational force is so much so that the top basically opens while it's under pressure?
Yes, if someone's holding the handle. So the top can't rotate. If no one's holding the handle, it rotates together and flies through the air, and it could take someone's head off. But if when she grabbed it, which was a reasonable thing to do, the bottom could move and the top couldn't. So it rotated open.
Wow. That's great. I mean, this case has just been a lesson in hard work and perseverance, and if you see the case and believe in it, not to give up. I mean, it's just
such hard work for your clients that most people would have not done it, not taken the risk.
Yeah, definitely.
The hardest thing I think for the younger lawyers were, by the end we had, I think, 4.5 lawyers working full-time on it, and 2 paralegals, and then Roland, who was doing the testing. But the hardest thing for the younger lawyers, and that's why it goes back to what Steve was saying about being trained in product liability, was because 200 times in a minor ways and a dozen ways in major ways, we changed our theory of the case because we had proven it wrong. We went to get, like a demonstrative or something to show the jury about our theory, and we proved our theory wrong. Right. So again and again, we had to say, the one young lawyer in particular would say, but that's not our theory. I'm like, well, that wasn't our theory. Okay. Yes. It's an evolving thing. There's nothing wrong with it. We're trying to prove our case, but when we disprove it, well, we have to be honest about that. That part doesn't work. Let's find what does.
Yeah. Well, we can't wrap up this episode, John, without me letting you know, and he can just edit it out if he doesn't like it, that Raz, our producer, texted me while we were recording to tell me that he's cooking dinner in a pressure cooker right now.
Hopefully it's not
So-
Vasconia.
Yeah.
If he hasn't had a panic attack in the course of this episode.
Yeah.
No, but
Don't
yeah,
overfill it. Hopefully it has a fill line at least.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it
That's
has
right.
a fill line. Yes, that's
Okay.
fine.
All right. Are you good on the brand, Raz?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay. All right.
Well, John, this has been just a great discussion. I want to remind everybody we've been talking about the Gonzalez versus Lifetime Brands Incorporated case, which resulted in a $27 million settlement. It was down in Broward County, Florida, and we've been talking with John Uustal of Kelley and Uustal, or Kelley Uustal. And you can look up John at kelleyyuustal.com. That's KELLEYUUSTAL.com. John, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I love talking about cases.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's why we do the whole podcast, is we enjoy talking to great trial lawyers about the tremendous work they do every day.
Yeah, you can tell listening to it. You can tell that you guys are really into it.
I mean, I want to talk about myself, but
Right.
it turns out that's
Exactly.
not what this podcast is
Yeah.
about.
Well, I'll be a guest host if you want, and you can be the guest.
Right, exactly. It'll be the Yvonne podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it.